Grace and peace. Amen. Have you ever come to a critical crossroads in life when you've had an important decision to make and for whatever reason everything came together and you did what you knew you needed to do in trusting God, and you look back and think, man, that was the best decision I ever made? Have you ever come to a critical crossroads in life, kind of wondering about things, and you trusted God, and then you look back and think, why didn't I trust God more? One of those moments that make sense in all kinds of other moments in life, and sometimes when you do that, you kind of get in touch with why you're here and what God made you to do, the purpose for which God created you. Now today we're looking at Esther in this three-part sermon series on great women of the Bible. Esther is an Old Testament book, 14 chapters. I really encourage you to read through it this afternoon. Maybe take you 45 minutes to read through it. It's a little complicated, but I want to talk with you about a key moment in Esther's life when she trusted God, when that moment made all kinds of sense of every other moment in her life, and when that decision that she made affirmed that she had made exactly the right choice. It's then that she knew why God had placed her on this earth and the reason for which God had knit her together in her mother's womb and created her to be that way. We have sermon notes today, so if you'd like to take those out and keep those with you, because I'll make reference to that through the rest of the sermon. Let me read the first paragraph there. The Old Testament book of Esther tells the story of the deliverance of the Jewish people won by Esther, who was a beautiful young Jewish woman who became the queen of Persia, a non-Jewish state, of course. She lived in the Persian Empire when Xerxes was the king of Persia. It took place around the time that Ezra built the temple and Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem about 450 to 425 BC. So a long time ago. There's four key characters in the book of Esther. Let me talk you through each one of those. The story starts when King Xerxes inherited the powerful Persian throne from his father. Xerxes was the kind of king that you would expect to be, one who stumbled into wealth and fortune and status. Young King Xerxes could also more justifiably be called King Jerxes, because Xerxes was a biblical jerk. Xerxes loved parties and friends and had this thing for beautiful women. Xerxes, however, was a guy in the Bible who just wasn't too bright. I mean, his elevator stopped a couple floors short and his anchor didn't quite hit the bottom of the ocean, and Xerxes was, by all means, he was not the fastest bunny in the forest. Xerxes was easily manipulated, and he had a strong appetite and a weak ego. Shortly after Xerxes became king, he threw a party for some very influential people that lasted several days. An extravagant party where they pulled out all the stops, the best food and wine and entertainment. I mean, it was an extravagant, lavish party. So in the midst of all of these influential people, King Xerxes asked his wife, Queen Vashti, to come out and show how beautiful she was to all of the important, influential people there at the party. He wanted to kind of show her off. And she recognized that she is too much of a woman for that. She didn't want to be hauled out as an object to be gawked at. And so his wife, Queen Vashti, refused to come out. Now that made dim-witted King Xerxes mad, and he thought, you know what? If the queen of the king could disgrace the king in such a public way, then no man in my empire would be ever safe from future disgrace, that their wives might visit on her husband. And so he ordered his wife, Queen Vashti, banished from the empire. When Xerxes sobered up from his 7-day party, he realized, whoops, now I don't have a queen to take care of me. And Xerxes wasn't too bright. Did I mention that? He was one burger short of a happy meal. I mean, he was not the sharpest tool in his shed. His intellect was only rivaled by garden tools. And so King Xerxes came up with an amazing idea to have a beauty pageant with the most beautiful single women in the empire. Now Esther, this was a non-Jewish empire, emperor of Persia. Esther was a young orphan woman at the time. She had been raised by her kind uncle Mordecai. They were Jewish, and they were ones who had been in captivity in Babylon. Remember hearing about the Babylon captivity before it fell to the Persians? And because Esther was so beautiful, so gorgeous, her uncle Mordecai, also Jewish, thought that Esther would just be a shoo-in to win this beauty pageant and become the queen of Persia. And because he knew that if the king knew that Esther was Jewish, he wouldn't even consider her to be the queen of Persia, he encouraged Esther, don't tell anybody you're Jewish. Enter this beauty contest, but don't tell anybody that you're Jewish. Needless to say, beautiful Esther won the pageant, and this young Jewish woman became the queen of Persia. Now, on a sermon note, we've talked about Xerxes, Mordecai, and Esther. So she's won this pageant, and Haman is the vain and vicious villain. Haman, the fourth one there, was one of the high-ranking officials in the Persian Empire. And because he was a mean and vicious and vain villain, he convinced King Xerxes to make everybody bow down as he walked through town. Xerxes thought, well, that would be a pretty cool idea as I walk through town to have everybody bow down before me. And everybody did it except for Mordecai. Mordecai, the shrewd mentor of Esther, Mordecai would not bow down because his Jewish faith would not allow him to do that. And that made Haman and Xerxes so mad that they hatched a sinister plot to have all of the Jewish people killed in that area. If Mordecai wouldn't bow down, then all the Jews should be killed. His anti-Semitism was rooted in this personal vendetta against Mordecai. He went to King Xerxes and they thought, remember, Xerxes wasn't too bright. Not the fastest hamster on the wheel. Xerxes would go to the fair to a mind reader and they'd charge him half price. His belt didn't go around all the loops. He just wasn't too smart. So Xerxes decided that the Jews were this great threat to Persia and that they needed to be killed for the sake of national security. Besides, Haman, a high-ranking official who hatched this plot, said, I will give millions of dollars to your super PAC fund if you do this and kill all the Jews. King Xerxes was just about to order a decree that all the Jews in the land should be killed, but before they hatched that plot, Mordecai said to Esther, go to the king. You are the beautiful queen. You are Jewish, even though Xerxes doesn't know it. Go to the king and plead our case for the Jewish people. Now, at first, Esther resisted. She said, Mordecai, Uncle Mordecai, even though I'm the queen, if I walk into the king without permission, he could have me banished from the kingdom like he did with Queen Vashti. Esther was beautiful and privileged, but she was also on thin ice, fearing for her life if she went to the king with such a request. She could lose her privilege, her standing, her place of prominence, and promise. What was she going to do? What was she going to do? That's where we get our first lesson from the book of Esther, if you want to flip over your sermon notes. Number one, God, or our faith in God, does not insulate us from life's struggles. God, or our faith in God, does not insulate us from life's struggles. Even though Esther was one of the chosen people, a Jewish person, she could have lost everything. She could have been banished or killed. She was beautiful and privileged, and the king adored her, but she could have lost all that, even though she was one of God's chosen people. God, or our faith in God, does not insulate us from life's struggles. Sometimes I think that people have the mistaken belief that once someone becomes a Christian, then everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be champagne and caviar. Sometimes people think that when we become Christian that there's this kind of bubble of insulation around us, that injustices of crime and homelessness and divorce won't come our way if we just believe in God strongly enough, that this bubble will protect us. Sometimes we think that dreaded diseases will never invade our homes, and if we just have enough faith, that will never happen. How about you? Do you sometimes believe that God will never allow something scary or difficult to come into your life? Look at the Bible verse there. Jesus says to his disciples, "In my Father's house there's many dwelling places, and I go to prepare a place for you. I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am you may be also." He has the final paragraph already written. But then he says, in this world you will have trouble. You will have trouble. There's a will there. It isn't you might have some challenges here and there. He says, in this world you will have trouble. Even though he's preparing a place for us, even though the final chapter has already been written, there's no bubble of insulation. There's no place to hide in this life from struggles or challenges. Christians are not immune from or insulated from life's struggles. But number two, there's also a promise with that. Before we get to number two, the promise is in Psalm 23 that was just read a moment ago. We will have troubles in this world, but even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff. They comfort me. And that's what Esther held on to as she was deliberating about stepping into the danger zone. She had comfort and status and privilege. She was being asked to go to the king and risk her life and her future for the sake of other people. And Esther, first of all, said, "Why don't you get somebody else to do it? Can't you get somebody else to stand in for me? Why is it up to me? I don't want to do this. Leave me alone." Second thing we learn from Esther is number two. Sometimes God puts us in specific places for a strategic purpose. Sometimes God puts us in specific places for a strategic purpose. Mordecai responded to Esther's reluctance to go, and Mordecai says, "Who knows, perhaps you have come to royalty for just a time as this." For just a time as this, when all of the stuff in Esther's life came together and she realized that it was all focusing on that moment. When she would look back and think, man, I'm glad I trusted God, but at that moment, for a specific purpose, for a specific place, for a strategic person. It's right there. Perhaps there is a time just such as this, where the drama of your life will turn on the response that you make to God's call on your life. The whole meaning of your life is sometimes determined by a single moment. Sometimes it is, like I said at the beginning, in every life there's at least one moment that makes sense of all of the other moments of life, and it's then that you know why you're here, what God has put you on this earth to do, and that was the message for Esther. The message of the book of Esther is that God placed this young Jewish woman at a strategic place in order to save God's holy people from this dim-witted emperor and an evil empire. God placed Esther at a specific place for a strategic purpose, and 500 years later, after Esther, God would place another young Jewish woman at a specific place for a strategic purpose in order to save God's holy people, us, from certain death. This time, 500 years later, her name would be Mary, and the person who would be saved was not the Jewish people, but it would be you. God places certain people at strategic places for specific purposes, and I really do think God continues to do so. Don't let it be lost on you that maybe God has placed you at a strategic place, at your school, in your office, in your neighborhood, placed you at a strategic place in your family, and maybe God hasn't shared why with you yet. Maybe the why will one day become clearer. Maybe the decision that you make at that time will somehow clarify the purpose for which God has created you. But I do believe that like Esther, like Mary, one day you will find out why you are here for just such a time as this. And when that happens, number 3, when that happens, God does not want us to face struggles alone. God doesn't want us to face struggles alone. Look what God did with Esther. Esther realized the enormity of the task in front of her. She knew that her success was not going to be guaranteed. She knew that if she stepped out and did what God was calling her to do, it might cost her her life, but she trusted God. She trusted God. In the same way, God doesn't want us to face struggles alone. Look what Esther did at the end of our first lesson for today. Esther said, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days or nights. I and my maids will also fast as you do, and I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." If I perish, I perish. Esther realized that she couldn't face her fears all alone. She needed help. She needed support. She needed prayer warriors to be with her and prayer chains behind her. So she asked all of the Jews in Susa to be in prayer for her for 3 days. They were constantly in prayer. I mean, the prayer chains were buzzing and the online prayers were just going to town praying on her behalf. I think life as a Christian is also not a solo sport. Life as a Christian is a team effort. Life as a Christian means being a part of a community of faith, as a part of God's family where we gather for worship and singing and praying, receiving the bread and wine to be strengthened as we are doing this morning. Life as a Christian means being together, life together, supporting one another, being gentle and kind and loving and forgiving. So what happened to Esther? Well, read the story. Read the rest of the story today, and I encourage you to do that. You'll find that through a series of banquets and dinners, she did go to the king. And the king granted her request to save the Jews of that region from annihilation. Because of Esther's intervention, you and I are here today. Because of what Esther did, we are given an example of one who was able to thrive spiritually and grow in a very difficult time. And I believe through her example, we can gain strength even when we face difficult and challenging time. There's a prayer in italics at the bottom that I'd like you to pray with me, and just keep that with you. Even rip off the bottom, put it on your mirror when you're brushing your teeth. But let's read that and pray that together. Lord Jesus, I live in a needy world. I believe you have put me where I am for a reason. May I shine like a star in the universe, holding on to your word of life. Help me to know the strategic place you have put me for your specific purpose. Help me to thrive spiritually wherever I am. Amen. Let's stand and sing.